Do we already know the commands of the Torah? Do we already have a sense of morality which is according to the Torah? I want to address this from two different angles, because on the one hand, it is true that we know many of the commands. Even if we have not yet set out to study the Torah very thoroughly, even if we have not yet fully familiarized ourselves with the commandments, we still have this sense of many of the commands. We still have this sense of morality that oftentimes lines up with the commands of the Torah. So we already are going to accept this as obvious, accepting it as obvious that you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery. Those things are obvious issues of morality, things that we already believed to be issues of right and wrong before we came to the awareness of the Torah, before we realized that we are going to seek to follow the Torah fully. But this is something that we need to be cautious about, because if we are recognizing that we need to return to His ways, we are recognizing that the things that we learned in the past were not always right. Not everything that we learned previously is exactly according to the Torah. And this might manifest itself in a number of different ways. There are a lot of things that we may have previously believed to be issues of morality, to be right and wrong. And some of these beliefs may have been just personal beliefs of our parents, or personal beliefs of some teachers that we've had, or maybe just based upon the general consensus of society or the culture that we grew up in. And not all of these things are from the Torah. So we have to be careful to make that distinction. But it's not just as simple as saying, well, there's some issue and we're dividing it between things that are commanded in the Torah and things that are from personal beliefs, things that are not in the Torah. It's not as simple as just separating between those two things a lot of times. Because our natural inclination is going to be what we assumed to be right and wrong before must still be the case. We must still defend our previous beliefs. And of course, this is kind of interesting because we are recognizing that not everything we learned in the past was exactly right. Not everything that we learned before was according to the Torah. So necessarily, some of the things that we may place a lot of importance in, some of the things that we may think are obviously right or obviously wrong, or things that we think shouldn't matter, this may not be an issue of the Torah. It may be an issue of beliefs that we picked up in the past that are not according to the Torah. So we have to be careful about this because our inclination will be to defend those things. Our inclination will not be generally to take some issue and say, okay, where does this belong? Is it an issue of Torah or is it an issue of personal beliefs? It will typically not manifest in that way, especially if there's any emotion attached to it. Some of these things we may have felt very strongly about in the past. We may have even vehemently defended them against other people and made a particular point about how important they are to us, how important they were to us. But what are we doing now? We are seeking to return to His ways. And part of seeking to return to His ways is admitting that we weren't completely right in the past. Even though we may have known some of the commands, some of the things that we learned about the commands may not have been right, and some of the commands we may not even be aware of yet. And so recognizing that, accepting that we were wrong, similar to how it says in Leviticus 26:41 through 45, accepting our wrongdoing and seeking to correct that, humbling ourselves, being willing to recognize when we may not know something. A lot of times it can be easy to see this with other people. It can be easy to see this maybe with some people you've met in the past. Maybe you've seen people return to the Torah in part, and then they are still very strongly clinging on to certain things that we know are not in the Torah, or certain things that very clearly are at least contradictory to the Torah in some way. It can be easy to see that out there and think that they really need to hear about this. They really need to learn something in order to correct their ways. But it's a lot harder to think, what can I learn from that? I might be seeing something that someone else is doing, but it can be difficult to say, how am I doing that? Because a lot of times, it's not just them alone doing these things. A lot of these things, we all do them in some way. We all have some tendency to try to defend our previous beliefs. So we need to recognize, what is our goal now? Returning to his ways, learning what he considers to be important. If we are seeking to do what the Torah nation would do, to do according to what a nation following after the Torah would do, the culture that they necessarily would have, based upon focusing on the written Torah, we need to make a careful distinction between these two things. And sometimes this may be difficult to evaluate. Sometimes we will just need to step back and realize, do I really know what I think I know? So there's this self-evaluation and this humbling of our hearts. This is something that we all need to recognize in one way or another. We need to return to his ways and recognize what he considers important.